Welcome to the world of scale modeling with Mike Ashe, where techniques, tips, and creativity come alive with dozens of tutorials, projects, tape-up reviews, and picture references to help you build better scale models and enjoy our wonderful hobby. Welcome to Part 5 of our 5-part series on building and detailing the Revell monogram 148 scale B-26 Marauder. In this final episode, we're going to airbrush the model, we're going to do some decal application, final assembly, and then we'll do some mild weathering. So here we go. The entire surface of the model was primed, and then imperfections in the upper surface were sanded out. Unfortunately, the surface detail that was saved during the earlier seam work process was lost during this final sanding process. The area was then reprimed, and we are now ready to begin the final coats. The lower surfaces were airbrushed with a dark gold gray color. The curved masking lengths on the fuselage were accomplished by first creating the shapes on cardstock. The shapes were cut out and traced onto the masking tape so that the curves on both sides of the fuselage would be exactly the same. The entire lower surface area was then covered with larger strips of masking tape. Note the tape on the cowlings and the engine nacelles. The upper surfaces were then airbrushed with an olive drab color, and I gave the surfaces 2 coats. The fabric-covered control surfaces were then outlined with thin strips of masking tape. The upper fabric control surfaces were airbrushed with olive drab with some flat white added to lighten up the color just a little bit. The lower fabric-covered control surfaces were also masked off, and a slightly lighter shade of the dark gold gray color was airbrushed onto these surfaces. The engine exhausts were then masked off and airbrushed with a burnt umber color. The upper olive drab surface colors are looking pretty good. Note the slightly lighter color on the fabric-covered control surfaces. The wing light openings were then masked off and airbrushed zinc chromate green. The assembly is now ready for a clear gloss coat. Minwax polyurethane clear gloss was airbrushed over the entire surface. 2 coats were applied, and each coat was allowed to dry for 24 hours. One of the secrets to good decal application is to carefully remove as much of the clear carrier film from around each decal as possible to minimize silvering. With all the decals applied and the areas around each decal cleaned up with a damp Q-tip to remove any residual decal glue, the surfaces were then sealed with Tester's dull coat. The inside areas of each landing gear door received a light coat of dark gray pastel dust applied with a flat brush. The brush strokes were from top to bottom. The surfaces were then sealed with a clear dull coat. The engines received a coat of clear dull coat, and then they were lightly brushed with a dark gray pencil pastel dust, and then resealed with the clear dull coat. The leading edges of the engine cowlings were lightly dry brushed with silver paint applied with a tiny flat brush. The inside areas received a dusting of dark gray pastel dust, which was then sealed with dull coat. The decals were applied to the propeller blades. The edges were then weathered with a silver pencil and then sealed with dull coat. To apply a subtle amount of dark-colored weathering to the underside and to slightly fade the decals, dark and medium gray pencil pastel dust was applied over the entire surface with wedge-shaped makeup sponges. To slightly fade the olive drab color and the upper surface decals, Medium gray pencil pastel dust was applied with the same wedge-shaped makeup sponges. Light gray pencil pastel dust was applied around the engine nacelles. The application of the pencil pastel dust needs to be from front to back to replicate the effects of the airstream over the surfaces. The staining from the fuel caps was done with a stiff flat brush and dark gray pastel dust. The model was then sealed with dull coat. The landing gear were airbrushed with dull coat. Dark gray pastel dust was then applied, and then the parts were resealed with the same dull coat. Brake lines were made from black stretch sprue, and the brake line clamps were made from thin lengths of masking tape painted silver. The engines were superglued into place. Be sure the positioning of the depth of the engines from the front is the same on both cowlings. The right cowling would not sit flush against its engine nacelle, so additional resin material had to be carefully scraped off the engine backing until the assembly fit correctly. The leading edge wing lights had their backings painted silver and red. They were then attached with tiny drops of white glue. The leading edges of the wings and the elevator also received subtle dry brushing with silver paint applied with a flat brush, using a light stippling motion. The paint on the bomb attachment locations was scraped off, and then the bombs were superglued into place. The assembled bomb racks were attached with tiny drops of white glue. The streaking effect behind the raised appendages and the dark-colored outlines of the flaps were achieved by using the makeup sponges to apply the pencil pastel dust. The bomb bay doors, and then the landing gear, and finally the landing gear bay doors were all glued into place. The engine cowlings were glued into place with slow set superglue so that I had a little bit of adjustment time. The engine cowlings look great, and they fit well onto the nacelles. The guns for the gun packs were glued into place first, and then the engine cowlings were attached. The clear parts were carefully masked with tiny strips of masking tape. The framing on the clear parts is very subtle, and the edges have almost no depth. This makes masking them a real challenge. The first layer of paint on these clear parts was the interior color and then the olive drab surface color. Before removing the masking, the surfaces were dry brushed with silver paint, weathered with the medium gray pastel dust, and then sealed with tester's dull coat. The clear parts were attached with white glue. The cockpit canopy required several applications of white glue to fill the tiny voids around it. The tail turret was assembled, attached to its clear part, and then white glued into place. The upper clear canopy was then attached with white glue, and any voids were filled with white glue and then touched up with a detail brush. Small drops of white glue were applied to the turret ring, and then the turret was inserted into the ring. The antenna wire is nylon sewing thread inked with a black indelible marker. The antenna wire was attached to the rudder, run through the hole in the antenna, masked to the canopy, glued into place, and then the excess was trimmed off. The propellers were attached with tester's red tube glue so they could be properly positioned. The pitot tubes on both wings were attached and positioned with white glue. The model is now complete, and it looks pretty good. Note how the mild application of the pencil pastel dust has faded the decals into the surface of the model. The decals look like they're painted onto the surface of the model. The air scoops on the engine cowlings took a lot of work, but they look pretty good once they're painted. The subtle pencil pastel dust weathering on the underside also enhances the appearance of the model. The landing gear bays and the bomb bays also look pretty good. The engines also look pretty darn good. The Revell monogram kit and the old AMT kit came out about the same time in the late 1980s, and here you can see the subtle differences between the engine nacelles and the fuselages. There's also some differences in the wings. Thanks for watching this 5-part series on building the Revell monogram 140H scale B-26 Marauder. And stay tuned for our next video series on super detailing the 1:350th scale Tamiya USS Missouri. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a thumbs up. And when you get the chance, visit our website at www.mikeashley.com, where you're going to find dozens of free PDF downloads, including tutorials, picture references, model galleries, projects, and my 5 original scale modeling books. Thanks to Ben Sound and Videvo for the royalty-free music, and happy scale modeling!